Picture this: London in the mid-20th century, swirling with aristocratic cliques, lavish clubs, and a glamorous set of upper-crust figures who sipped champagne while the world changed around them. Among these, one man in particular stood out for his impeccable tailoring and cool confidence at the gaming tables, a charismatic earl whose life transformed into Britain's most enduring missing person mystery. This is the story of John Bingham, 7th Earl of Lucan, better known as Lord Lucan, a suave gambler whose name became synonymous with murder, an audacious disappearance, and endless speculation. He was born on December 18, 1934, into the Bingham family, who held the earldom of Lucan for generations. The father, George Bingham, 6th Earl of Lucan, and the mother, Caitlin Dawson, welcomed young John in a world of tradition and status. Yet from his first breaths, the usual motherly closeness wasn't there. His mother battled a critical blood clot in her lung, leaving an infant John mostly in the care of a nanny. Not the warmest start, but nothing so unusual for aristocratic families, where nannies often held the reins. That was how John's earliest memories took shape: a staff-run nursery, the glow of gilded lamps, the hush of adult conversation behind closed doors. By 1940, the Second World War ravaged Europe, and the Binghams decided to send their children across the Atlantic to Mount Kisco, New York. For 5 years, John and his siblings lived with a wealthy family friend named Marcia Brady Tucker. This gave him a taste of American abundance. Rations were less strict, luxuries more accessible. That early exposure to the good life would define him. On returning to England in 1945, the stark difference hammered home. The war had bombed out parts of London, rationing persisted, and the father's socialist leanings meant the family tried to live more modestly. John, used to transatlantic comfort, reportedly suffered nightmares during this period. He was, after all, an aristocrat who had glimpsed an easier existence in the States and found post-war Britain dreary in comparison. He enrolled at Eton College, one of England's most prestigious boarding schools, and that's where gambling first sank its hooks into him. He sneaked off campus to place bets at local horse tracks. For a teenager, that was a bold act, but it thrilled him. He was no academic prodigy, though Eton recognized his people skills and let him serve as head of house. By 1953, he graduated only to be drafted into national service with the Coldstream Guards, mirroring the path his father once took. Imagine the irony: a gambler forced to adopt strict discipline in the Guards. Off duty, though, John turned to his beloved poker, playing late into the night for small fortunes. That pattern would define him: refined by day, risk-taker by night. When his national service ended, John Bingham tried his hand at normal employment, landing a junior post at a London bank with a modest salary of £500 yearly. But remember that the Bingham name came with trust funds. By 1960, he was receiving around £12,000 a year from family sources, a princely sum in those days. He hobnobbed with wealthy stockbrokers and joined them on water ski weekends in the Bahamas. Then he discovered the Claremont Club, a private casino in London that became his favorite playground. A watershed moment occurred in 1960 when Bingham lost out on a bank promotion, shrugged it off, and promptly won £26,000 in a single night at baccarat. That was it. He quit banking to become a professional gambler. Sure, that spelled ruin for some, but to Bingham, the euphoria of high-stakes play was irresistible. While perfecting his backgammon skills, he eventually claimed a top spot in the global rankings. He earned the moniker Lucky. In truth, it was a hit-or-miss brand of luck. Some nights he pocketed thousands, other nights he left thousands in the house's hands. But so far, his father's or relatives' deep pockets often bailed him out. He also invested in thoroughbred racehorses, trying to multiply his fortune, but the costs often exceeded any prize money. Meanwhile, socially, he was a star at the Claremont, brushing shoulders with celebrities and aristocrats. He drove an Aston Martin, took private flights to race meets, wore black tie every night. Rumors circulated that the famed James Bond novelist Ian Fleming had once recommended Bingham for the role of 007, given his refined accent and gambler's glamour. Producer Albert Broccoli apparently considered it, but Bingham decided acting wasn't for him. He'd auditioned for a 1966 film and found the experience awkward. So no James Bond. A near miss that might have changed his story drastically. Romantically, Bingham found a partner in Veronica Duncan, a woman who dabbled in modeling and secretarial work. They clicked at a golf function in 1963. She was bright from a similarly well-connected circle. They married that November. 2 months later, Bingham Zather died of a stroke, and John inherited the earldom of Lucan plus £250,000. That's how he became the 7th Earl of Lucan. Veronica thus gained the title Countess of Lucan. They bought a Belgravia home, had 3 children, Francis, George, and Camilla. At first they seemed a glamorous match, but tension simmered. Veronica found that Lucan's main love was the gaming table. He spent afternoons and evenings at the Claremont, leaving her at home to handle childcare. He tried including her in his sporting passions, golf, fishing, but she wasn't interested. Meanwhile, postpartum depression weighed her down after each birth, especially with Camilla in 1970. She needed a supportive husband. Instead, he was out gambling. The marriage deteriorated. Lucan tested controlling methods to address her depression. Veronica later alleged physical abuse, describing him hitting her with a bandage-wrapped cane, determined to beat the madness out of her. By 1972, they were living separate lives under one roof. A blowout argument that Christmas was the final straw. He left. He set up in a flat nearby, fixated on winning custody of the children. Because in his mind, Veronica was an unstable mother. He embarked on elaborate attempts to show she was unfit, from hiring private detectives to eavesdropping on phone calls. Sometimes he'd park outside the family home, presumably observing or menacing her. They battled in court. It turned nasty. In 1973, a judge sided with Veronica, awarding her custody. Furious, Lucan started sabotaging her finances, canceling milk deliveries, sowing chaos. As the war escalated, Veronica found it hard to keep nannies. He spooked them away or convinced them she was insane. Eventually, a new nanny, Sandra Rivet, arrived. She was 29, cheerful, good with children. She had no idea how dire the household's dynamic was. That year, Lucan's debts ballooned. His gambling losses soared. Plus the legal fees from the custody battle and his general high living left him teetering. By late 1974, he was telling friends that killing Veronica was the only solution. Some took it as a dark joke. Others quietly worried. On the morning of November 7, 1974, he was uncharacteristically up early, scheduling meetings but then canceling them. He borrowed a beat-up Ford Corsair instead of his usual Mercedes. The day seemed overshadowed by a mysterious tension. That evening, Veronica and her daughter Frances watched TV upstairs. Sandra Rivet typically had Thursday nights off, but she'd swapped the schedule. So on that particular Thursday, she was there. At around 9 p.m., she headed downstairs to the basement kitchen to fix tea for Veronica. She never came back. After some time, Veronica went to see what happened. The basement lights were off. Suddenly, a heavy blow struck Veronica's head. She fell, saw a man's gloved hand. It was Lucan. They struggled. She managed to fight back, biting him, grabbing his groin, forcing him to loosen his grip. He brandished a lead pipe wrapped in tape. He admitted he'd done for Sandra. Veronica realized her nanny must be dead. Terrified, she cooperated momentarily while he guided her upstairs, presumably to find bandages for her. Then, while he was distracted, she fled the house and burst into a nearby pub, the Plumber's Arms, screaming for help. The police stormed her home, discovering Sandra Rivett's body stuffed in a mailbag in the basement. Blood spatters told a grim story. Also discovered was an unscrewed basement light bulb, suggesting a planned ambush. Meanwhile, Lucan had vanished. Sometime that night he phoned his mother, saying there'd been a catastrophe at Veronica's. Then he dropped by friend Susan Maxwell Scott's place, spinning a tale of witnessing an attacker harming Veronica and slipping in blood. Susan provided stationery for him to write letters to a friend, Bill Shand Kidd. The letters indicated he was in dire straits financially. After that, he vanished again. 3 days later, the borrowed Ford Corsair turned up abandoned in New Haven, its trunk containing a second-wrapped pipe and an unopened vodka bottle. The press reported a rumor about a Colonel Mustard playing card, like the lead pipe murder scenario from Clue, but that never appeared in official evidence. Lucan's disappearance sparked an intense manhunt. Police suspected suicide, imagining he jumped off a cross-channel ferry. Others claimed he had wealthy friends who smuggled him abroad. The press feasted on theories. Investigators found his passport left behind, but that didn't mean he couldn't bribe a pilot or get fake documents. At an inquest in 1975, a jury formally named him as Sandra Rivett's murderer. But some of his social set, the so-called Eton Mafia or Claremont set, ridiculed that verdict as a sham. Indeed, Lucan's circle was formidable. Men like John Aspinall, James Goldsmith, and others who prided themselves on their aristocratic clout. Some even joked about feeding Lucan to Aspinall's zoo F tigers. Over time, many sightings of Lucan were reported: Malta, South Africa, a bar in Botswana, a Swiss retreat. Some believed he had plastic surgery, or lived disguised as a teacher, or wound up in an ashram in India. DCS Roy Ranson, the lead detective, initially believed Lucan had drowned himself, but later shifted to suspecting he fled to South Africa. Another detective heard rumors he was in Gabon. Others said Mozambique. Without conclusive proof, the legend grew. Meanwhile, Veronica, recovering from her head wounds, retained custody of her kids, but the trauma lingered. She believed wholeheartedly that Lucan was guilty. She lived under the shadow of the event, suffering mental health struggles. The children eventually moved away from her. As the years passed, the courts declared Lucan legally dead in 2016, but no body was ever found. We still see occasional headlines about new claims. A man in Australia is rumored to be Lucan, or a caretaker in New Zealand. The speculation never stops. One of the most poignant coda belongs to Sandra Rivett's family. For them, the media's obsession with Lucan overshadowed the fact that a beloved nanny had died brutally. In 2008, Sandra's son Neil Berryman, who only discovered his birth mother's identity late in life, has campaigned tirelessly to find Lucan or confirm his fate. As recently as 2020, he claimed advanced facial recognition software matched an elderly man in Brisbane to Lucan's old photos. Australian authorities brushed it off, but the rumor sparked a new wave of coverage. The truth remains elusive. The elusive Earl might well have died decades ago, or perhaps he lived quietly, under an alias, protected by wealthy allies who smoothed his path. The story of Lord Lucan is about the collision of class privilege, financial desperation, and personal darkness. He grew up steeped in aristocratic polish, yet never found a stable footing in the real world beyond gambling. The glamour of the Claremont masked an addiction that led him deeper into debt, fueling a sense of bitterness when he lost custody of his children. In that swirl, desperation overshadowed reason. The murder that night may have been a tragic, mistaken identity scenario. Some argue he intended to kill Veronica but struck Sandra by accident. Or he might not have planned anything so final, just an intimidation that spiraled. We can only guess. Then he vanished, leaving behind more questions than answers. 50 years on, the tabloids still resurrect the story whenever a new lead emerges. Did his social circle, or Clermont-Serre, help him escape in a private plane? Did he bury himself in the African bush, or check into a clandestine Swiss clinic? Did he drown or blow his brains out in a remote cabin, leaving no trace? The conspiracies swirl. One of the tragedies is that the victim, Sandra Rivet, rarely gets center stage. She was a 29-year-old caretaker with dreams, hobbies, a boyfriend. She might not have realized how violent Lucan's feelings had grown. She stepped into the basement one night to make tea and never stepped out. Veronica, equally victimized, survived, but faced a lifetime of psychological scars. Meanwhile, the comedic rumor of Colonel Mustard, the lead pipe, the haul from the clue board game, is overshadowed by a real woman's life cut short. That's perhaps the harsh reminder that a gilded aristocratic facade can conceal a horrific reality. And so the final question lingers. Is he out there? Probably not. The majority who studied the case believe Lucan either ended his life or died soon after fleeing. But the possibility that he lived out his days incognito enthralls us still, hinting that wealth and connections can orchestrate a perfect vanishing act. This tension between a romantic fugitive story and a monstrous child murderer keeps the legend alive. In popular culture, he's a byword for vanishing. People might say, he pulled a Lord Lucan if someone disappears. The phrase is telling we can't let go of a good puzzle. The image of a tuxedoed earl stepping into the darkness after a hideous crime is too cinematic to let slip into oblivion. All these years on, the case has never closed. The UK Met Police still hold a file on him, technically listing him as wanted for murder, and the world remains divided. Did he kill himself to avoid dishonor, or was he cunning enough to orchestrate a complete life under another name, living quietly among conspirators who shielded him? Did the upper echelons circle the wagons to protect one of their own? Each new claim or sighting triggers a wave of coverage, but none are definitively proven. The logic might suggest a watery grave, yet the mystery is more captivating if he's out there, an aging aristocrat who cheated justice. Maybe that's the final twist. Lord Lucan's life was shaped by illusions. The illusions of wealth, the illusions of gambler's luck, the illusions of paternal entitlement. Even in death, if indeed he died, illusions swirl around him. Nevertheless, the facts remain stark. On November 7th, 1974, a beloved nanny was murdered in Belgravia, her employer viciously assaulted. The 7th Earl of Lucan fled the scene and vanished. A coroner's jury found him responsible for that killing. No formal trial ever took place. Half a century later, we still debate whether he truly took his own life or found refuge abroad. His family stands by the official court judgments. He's presumed dead, so the earldom has passed on. But some still hold the flicker of a possibility that the lucky gambler found a new hand of cards in distant lands, living under borrowed identity, his old title left behind like a snake sloughing off its skin. Maybe that's all we can do. Weigh the rumors, examine the conflicting evidence, and walk away shaking our heads, compelled by a story that reads like a Gothic novel or a film noir. In the end, Lord Lucan is the man who committed murder, allegedly or definitively, depending on your vantage, and stepped into the night leaving the rest of us to pick at the scraps of his improbable legend.